Okay, so now we are going to move into the next chapter, chapter 15, which is the respiratory system. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to go over are the functions of the respiratory system. And just like it says right there, gas exchange. So we're moving oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, and whatever other gases there might be maybe moving. Move air to and from, or to and from exchange surfaces. So we're not there yet, but on the surface of the lungs, when it gets real small, you have little sacs that are called alveoli. And that's what they're talking about here, or that's what we're talking about here. That's the exchange surfaces. To protect exchange surfaces from environmental variations and pathogens. So you have white blood cells that are down inside the alveoli, alveolar macrophages, and that will help fight off the diseases and things such as that. You also have, as we go along, you're also going to see in the lungs, we actually have things that will clean out the air that will prevent stuff from getting into the lungs. They help produce sound. Your voice box is actually part of your respiratory system. It's called your larynx. And then detect olfactory stimuli. That's, in other words, that's smell. Remember, we studied the olfactory nerve? This is another thing that this does. So the functions are gas exchange between blood and air, move air to and from exchange surfaces, protect exchange surfaces from environmental variations and pathogens. Oh, and we got also warm air. We also warm the air up too as we breathe in. Produce sound and detect olfactory stimuli. Okay, so these are the components of the respiratory system. We have the nose, and then behind the nose, you're going to see this in a minute, we have the nasal cavity, and then we have the paranasal sinuses. You probably heard of sinus infections. That's what this is talking about right here when we say paranasal sinuses. Okay, the pharynx, this is also known as your throat. I'm just practicing writing here. R O A and then T. So there's your throat. All right, that's your pharynx. And you're going to see the pharynx is also part of the digestive system, depending on what we're talking about. The larynx, this is also known as your voice box. I'm not going to write that, but it's your voice box. The trachea, this is your windpipe. The trachea is going to come down. You've probably seen this before. It's going to split into two parts. These are called bronchi. And then the bronchi is going to split into more parts. And this is going to be called bronchioles. And then these will split into even more parts and more parts. Okay, and that's all of this here. All right, so these are bronchioles, and they get smaller and smaller. There's actually different types of bronchioles, and we'll go over that later on. And alveoli. This is what I was just talking about, where we do the gas exchange. So you breathe oxygen in, gets all the way down to the alveoli, then it goes into the bloodstream. By the way, if you notice, the one thing that's missing on the respiratory system, and I get a lot of people with this, is the mouth. The mouth is actually part of the digestive system. Some books will call it part of the respiratory system, but for the most part, the mouth is actually the respiratory system. Okay, so now if we look here, the respiratory system organization. So this is what we were talking about. Let me get my mouse here. Okay, so here's the nose, which is up here. The nose is right here, so this is where you breathe in. Okay, it says the tongue. The tongue is not part of the respiratory system, as far as I know. I don't know what some other books say, but for my class, it's not part of it. You have the nose, which we just said, right? And these are going to be called the nasal nares, where you breathe in. You have the nasal conchae. You have three of them. If you remember when we were doing the skeletal system, we talked about the middle and the upper, middle, and lower nasal conchae. That's them right there. Okay, and then as it says here, the internal nares, which is basically part of the back. The nasal cavity, if you notice inside your nose, you actually have this big opening in here, and it's separated from the oral cavity by your hard palate, which was the palatine bones and the maxillary bone. If you remember from the skull, that separates your oral cavity from your nasal cavity. Okay, here, this part right here, I'm just checking to see, it doesn't say it, but right here, you actually have your nasal pharynx, and there it says pharynx, and then you have the rest of your throat right here. Okay, as we come down, like I said, you have your windpipe, which is the trachea. Up, and before I go to there, remember I said you have the larynx. That's your voice box, which we're going to be talking about a little bit. That's part of the respiratory system. And it's right there. Okay, we have the trachea, which I said was the windpipe. It's going to break into bronchi. And then these are going to break into, it says bronchus, that's singular, bronchi is plural. And then you have the bronchioles, which if you notice now, this is going to break into bronchiole, another bronchiole, another bronchiole, another bronchiole. This goes down, and then it goes that way, and then that way, and then that way. So these are the bronchioles that are over in here. Okay, and then we got, and you can see we have our veins, which are surrounding the alveoli. This little squares over here. Here's my alveoli. This is cut away. So think of these as like little bubbles, but they're cut in half here, so they actually look like little bowls. And then you can see I have my blood supply that's right there with it. Okay, then if we look on the respiratory tract, we have two portions to it. We have the conducting portion, and we have the respiratory portion. So, oops, I didn't mean to cross that out. But if we look at this, what happens here? We're basically just moving air, conduct air movement into and out of the lungs, right? And then we have the respiratory portion, which is the gas exchange, which is what we've been talking about. And this is basically the alveoli and the bronchioles. Okay, and then respiratory mucus. Mucus is like a sticky fluid. And like it says here, it's going to line the nasal cavities. And the reason it does that is so that it can catch dirt and pathogens and things such as that, right? And then you have little cilia. We're going to see a picture of this coming up. Then we have little cilia. And what happens with the cilia is it's going to sweep the mucus up towards your throat, and then you swallow it, and your stomach kills the stuff. You have a runny nose. Runny nose are designed to get rid of stuff that are irritating the nose. They're annoying, but that's the point of a runny nose, is to get rid of stuff that's irritating it. Okay, and then we got the inside of the lungs. So this is actually, imagine over here to be a tube, such as the bronchial tube or the trachea or something like that, okay? And imagine this side here looks identical to this side over here. And then air is going to come in. And as you see here, we have our mucus, right? This is the sticky fluid. This says mucus layer. You're going to have the sticky fluid here. And then the cilia is like little oars or little pieces of hair that's going to move stuff up towards the throat. Goblet cells are going to produce mucus, right? So they basically secrete mucus. So the mucus is the thick, it's almost like saliva. And it's down here in your lungs, and you got it in several different areas of the body. And then what happens is, in this case, it's going to move up towards the throat so you can swallow it. Okay, and here we're looking at the regions of the pharynx. You have the nasal pharynx, and you have, okay, so we have the nasal pharynx, which is the respiratory portion of this, right? The oropharynx, I already went through this, and then the laryngopharynx. This is the part by your voice box. I'm not going to ask you the different regions on here. I mean, they're pretty simple. The part of your throat that's by the nose is the nasal pharynx. The part that's in your mouth is the oropharynx, and then the other part is by the voice box is the laryngopharynx. So that's an introduction into the respiratory system. These are the parts of the respiratory system. And so just so you know, so this is it for this part, the introduction to the respiratory system.